Welcome back to the Universalis podcast. I am Martin Kochański, the creator of Universalis, and in this episode I'll be looking at the highlights of the week ahead, starting with Sunday the 15th of September. The second readings in the Office of Readings are of many different kinds. There are sermons, letters, stories of the lives or the deaths of saints, each of them valuable in its own way. But out of all the second readings, there is one which has seemed different to me ever since I first saw it. It comes on Monday the 16th, and it is the story of the martyrdom of Saint Cyprian. The best way I can say it is this: it is not the words that make it different, but the light. Its action lies in perfect stillness. It seems to come from a world just outside ours, lit by a light whose colour is the colour that light had before colours were invented. It is the middle of the 3rd century AD. We are in the Roman province of Africa, whose capital is Carthage. The bishop of Carthage is called Cyprian, and he is significant in church history in many ways that I shan't go into now. The church is at peace, and for almost 40 years there have been no persecutions. The source of this second reading is the official court transcripts of the time. Rome was a settled and civilized state, and it kept records of this kind. It's always worth remembering, because it's easy to forget, that we do not see any classical Roman documents just because they were written at the time. We see them because they were written and rewritten for more than 1200 years. Someone would spot a centuries-old document in fading ink on crumbling paper in handwriting so old-fashioned as to be almost unreadable, and say, "It is worth the effort to copy this all out now, so that generations to come will be able to read it." And a few centuries later it all had to be done again. A modern printed book exists because at the time of publication the publisher thought he might make money out of it, that is all. An ancient book only survives because throughout its long life every generation has valued it. Official documents are official documents always and everywhere, and this one starts, as you might expect, with the date. When the Emperor Valerian was consul for the 4th time, and the Emperor Gallienus for the 3rd time, that is, 257 AD, on the 3rd day before the calends of September, that is, the 30th of August, at his offices in Carthage, the proconsul Aspasius Paternus said the following to the Bishop Cyprian. "The most sacred emperors Valerian and Gallienus have favoured me with a letter in which they command that those who do not practice the Roman religion should perform the Roman ceremonies. Accordingly, I must examine you on this subject. What is your answer?" The Bishop Cyprian said, "I am a Christian and a bishop. I know no other gods except the one and true God who made heaven and earth, the sea and all the things that are in them. This God we Christians worship. To him we pray day and night for ourselves and for all men, and for the safety of the emperors themselves." The proconsul asked, "Do you persist in this attitude?" The Bishop Cyprian replied, "A good will which has once come to know God cannot be changed." The proconsul said, "Would you be able, therefore, according to the command of their sacred majesties, to go to the city of Curubis as an exile?" The bishop said, "I will go." The proconsul said, "It is not only about the bishops that the sacred emperors have favoured me with a command, but about the presbyters also. Therefore I should like to know from you who are the presbyters who are stationed in the city." The bishop replied, "For the public good, your most salutary laws forbid such denunciation. Accordingly, I cannot disclose or reveal the presbyters to you. They will be found in the towns in which they live." The proconsul said, "I will today make an investigation." Cyprian said, "It is forbidden that anyone should come forward unasked and declare himself to be a Christian, nor would you approve of such a proceeding. Nevertheless, if you make investigation, you will find them." The proconsul said, "I will indeed find them," and he added, "There is a further command, that Christians should not meet together in any place, nor should they go into a cemetery, and if anyone disobeys such an evidently just precept, he will be beheaded. Cyprian the bishop replied, "Follow the commands you have been given." And so the proconsul ordered that the blessed Bishop Cyprian should be taken off into exile. It all feels more like a dance than a court scene. Move responds to move. Cyprian and Paternus are not arguing. Each of them is doing all that is correct. I even get a feeling that Cyprian is guiding Paternus to make sure that the proconsul obeys the emperor's commands to the letter. If you think about it, these two must be the most important men in the city, and they must know each other very well. Curubis turned out to be a charming little town by the sea about 30 miles away from Carthage. Paternus might have been ordered to send him into exile, but there was no order to make the exile unpleasant. But this was not going to be the end of it. In due course, Aspasius Paternus was moved on, and Galerius Maximus succeeded him as proconsul. He ordered Cyprian to be called back from exile and brought before him. New orders had come from Rome. Cyprian returned in September 258 and stayed on his own estate, daily expecting to be sent for. On the 13th, two of the most senior officials came for Cyprian. They put him between them in a chariot and drove him to a place 6 miles outside Carthage, where Galerius Maximus was staying in the hope of regaining his health after an illness. Cyprian stayed the night in the house of one of the officials. All the brethren heard the news and crowded into the street outside the official's door. On the morning of the 14th, the proconsul Galerius Maximus summoned the bishop Cyprian to appear before him. Now, everything so far has come from the proconsular acts of the time. Now is the moment when the second reading in the Office of Readings actually starts. To look at, it must have been a crowded scene. There was the proconsul, there was the bishop. There were the proconsul's councillors, because this was a formal court session. There were the secretaries taking dictation. There were all the crowd of Christians who had slept overnight in the street, because the proconsul had ordered them too to be present. But as a matter of the deepest reality, there was nothing of this. Everyone had faded out and only two remained, Galerius Maximus and Thascus Cyprian. It seemed as if they were the only two men left in the universe, and a new formal dance began. Galerius Maximus the proconsul said to Cyprian the bishop, "You are Thascus Cyprian?" The bishop Cyprian responded, "I am." The proconsul said, "You hold the office of leader of these men of sacrilegious mind?" The bishop replied, "I do." The proconsul said, "The most sacred emperors have commanded you to perform the rites of the Roman religion." The bishop replied, "I will not do it." The proconsul said, "Consider the matter." The bishop replied, "Do what it has been commanded to you to do. The matter is clear enough, and there is nothing that requires consideration." Now the otherworldly intimacy fades away again. We are back in this world and its mechanisms. The proconsul conferred briefly with his councillors, and then reluctantly, as if he had difficulty forcing the words out, uttered the stern words of the official condemnation. The sentence, read out from the official wax tablet, was inevitable. Cyprian should die by the sword. Cyprian ordered the executioner to be given 25 gold pieces, or aurei. That's an enormous sum, more than 3 ounces of gold. He was duly executed and duly buried. Galerius Maximus, the proconsul, died of the illness he had been suffering from a few days later. I don't know if the specialness of these moments of quiet between Cyprian and Paternus, and then between Cyprian and Maximus, have struck you as they did me. Let me try 2 other pictures. One is from the history of war, I suppose. Another is from sport. They share the same pattern. In legendary stories of ancient battles, we sometimes get this scene. It has been decided not to engage the armies, but to settle the outcome by single combat. A champion comes out from either side. All the armies stand around gorgeously arrayed, their plumes waving and their banners flapping in the breeze, but they are all useless. They are only spectators. it is at the centre that the matter will be decided. Or again, think of a boxing match, a large audience and a noisy one this time. But in the centre, the still centre inside the ropes, that is where all will be decided. Nothing else really matters. So now, think yourself into the mind of one of the champions or one of the boxers. You have trained and worked and trained again. You have become the best you can be. Now everything hangs on you and you alone. All the people who are behind you, you are doing this for them. But in the end, there is a distance between you and them. You are not them, and they are not you. It comes down to this. They cannot in the end have the faintest concept of who you are, of what it means to be you. You are alone. Not alone. There is one man in all the world who understands what it is to be you, who is going through everything you are going through. That is the man standing opposite you. What you have learned, he has learned. What you are feeling, he is feeling. What you are doing, he is doing. He is your brother. For the duration of this contest, he is your only brother. If he trips over something before the fight begins and falls over, you will be the one to step forward and help him up and make sure he is all right. He is your brother. You don't say it in words, and you don't need to, because you both know it and it doesn't need saying. I want to win, and everyone needs me to win. I will do everything I can to win. But if for some reason I don't win, I hope, my dear brother, that you do. What I have said is true of most fighters in all ages of mankind. But now, having seen all this, let's get back into the stillness of that day, Tuesday the 14th of September, 258. Cyprian and Maximus are at the centre. They are the only two people in the world. They are alone together. Now, if you listen, really listen, you will hear what is really going on. Cyprian is giving Maximus his blessing. We all know about blessings given by priests and such with the power of the church behind them, but there is a minor capacity to bless, by which anyone who has been given a grace can share it. Hilaire Belloc in The Path to Rome claims firmly that as a pilgrim he was able to give a blessing of a minor kind. How much greater then must be the blessing given by someone endowed with the grace of a coming martyrdom? And Cyprian used it. He used it on the man who had most need of it, the one who was condemning him to death. Watch the firmness and tenderness with which Cyprian guides Maximus step by step through the dance of fulfilling the legal procedures. The account says that when it came to pronouncing the condemnatory words that accompanied the sentence, Maximus almost couldn't speak. Can you see Cyprian looking him in the eye and giving him the strength to carry on? I think I can. For Cyprian, after all, the outcome was going to be simple. Quite soon he was going to be with God, and after that it was all in God's hands. But Maximus had to live on, and would have to live with what he had done. So Cyprian gave him the equipment to do that with, in the form of what every high-ranking Roman valued most, the certainty of having done his duty precisely as the law had laid it down. When we find ourselves in real situations of conflict, let's keep Tuesday the 14th of September 258 AD in our hearts, and remember that our enemy, by considering the same things worth fighting over as we do, has made himself our brother. Once you start seeing the theme of the martyr giving a blessing to his persecutor, you find it in all sorts of places. A few weeks ago we had St. Thomas More's final speech to his judges after his unjust condemnation, or rather, if you prefer, his correct condemnation according to an unjust law. More compared his judges to St. Paul at the stoning of Stephen. I don't know the progress of the judges' hearts and souls after that day, but if any of them found himself having to deal with the wrong he had done, and the devil loves to dig out our wrongs and throw them back at us at vulnerable moments, then perhaps the statement, "I am just like Paul," could have turned out to be a shield. One final example. The feast of St. Maximilian Kolbe was celebrated not long ago. Kolbe was in a prison camp at Auschwitz when, in reprisal for an escape, 10 prisoners were to be starved to death. Kolbe offered himself in the place of a man who had children, and the exchange was accepted. The hagiographies see that as a benefit to the man in question, and so it was, but equally it was a blessing for the man who was selecting people for death. His was a world in which everyone was daily doing things he would in normal life have found too horrible to contemplate. What Kolbe gave this man was the gift of an honourable act, one proposed to him which he could not only accept but carry through, as indeed we know that he did. We don't have to think that this one act of life could outbalance all the darkness, but we can practically know that in one heart, plunged into that darkness, a saving knowledge was implanted that even in such a case, light is possible. We have no way of knowing what effect that experience had, whether it was large or small, but that blessing was one which the martyr was able to give to his persecutor. Some of the peace and harmony of the martyrdom of St. Cyprian comes from the fact that both sides agreed on so much. They agreed by the 3rd century that the Roman Empire needed a religion. Above all, they agreed on the nature and value of the individual. The martyrs of the Korean Church, who are celebrated on Friday the 20th, show exactly the opposite kind of phenomenon. The Korean Church is celebrated as being very remarkable in that it was done almost entirely by lay men and lay women. People got hold of some Christian books and read them. One of them was baptized when he visited Peking. He baptized others. Generation after generation there were Christians. They were persecuted and they were martyred in the most horrible ways imaginable. No actual, organized, structured, clerical church was involved. You might think, why were these poor individuals selected for such savage torture? In the end, only 10,000 of them were killed. How could so few people in a great empire be enough of a threat to be worth bothering about? This question goes to the heart of the deepest conflicts in this world, both in the 19th century and now. The question is, in the hierarchy of being, what matters? At the lowest level, there are human cells. 30 trillion of them make a human body. The next level up is the human being. A certain number of millions of them make a state. 8 billion of them make the human race. Which is important? The cells, the human beings, the human race. I am more important than my cells. At least 50 billion of them die every day, and I don't care. If any of them decide to take their lives into their own hands, I call them warts or cancers, and I kill them by poisoning, burning, whatever it takes. Nobody seriously disagrees about this. Leaving the cells out of the argument, then, there are 2 human things left: human beings and human societies. Which is more important? Because we are Christians, and because we live in a society formed by Christianity and forever contaminated by it, we naturally believe in the value of the individual. Deep down, all human communities are at the service of human individuals, because God the Son chose to become incarnate as an individual. What we have to remember is that this is not self-evidently true in the same way that 2 and 2 make 4. In many societies today it is taken for granted, as it always has been, that the state is the only reality, and that the things that walk around on 2 legs on the earth are only human resources, as useful collectively as human cells are useful, but exactly as worthless individually as a human cell is. We can't simply tell such a society, "You are wrong." It will say the same thing back to us. We can't simply say to it, "because human rights." Because human rights is basically just words. It is de-Christianized Christianity. It's about as useful as dehydrated water. The attempt to discourage an optimized human society from considering itself as being more important than the human resources it makes use of can only use consciously or unconsciously Christian principles. As Cardinal Henry Edward Manning said, all human conflict is ultimately theological. Until we settle the theological war, we have no right at all to denounce the savage torturing of 10,000 Korean martyrs or any of the massacres of millions of the 20th century, and if we do denounce them, we are indulging in vacuous posturing. We have to admit, if we do happen to be serious about what people like to call human rights, that the war we are fighting is a theological one. We need to study the foundations of our faith at least as deeply as the missionary orders did in the past. That's all for this week. If you'd like to write to us about anything, email universalis@universalis.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Have a good week in every sense, and let's pray for one another.